Hi, friends. Welcome to Chapter 16, the persuasive speech. So, in Chapter 16, we're going to look at persuasive speaking. So, in order to do that, we'll first define what is persuasion, and then we'll look at some of the challenges of creating, developing, and implementing a persuasive speeches. And then we'll look at the types of appeals we can use to enhance persuasion. We'll look at the types of audiences we will encounter when we give persuasive speeches. And then we'll look at the Toulmin's method of persuasion and the different types of approaches we can take our persuasive speeches. And then lastly, we will look at the organizational patterns, how to organize our persuasive speeches. So let's go ahead and get started with persuasion. What is persuasion? Well, essentially, persuasion is the process of creating, reinforcing, or changing people's beliefs or actions. And that's from the textbook. So usually we use persuasion when we're defending an idea. So let's say we have an idea or a proposal. And of course, there's going to be the critics of our ideas. So sometimes we have to defend our idea through persuading the audience that our idea is good. Or sometimes we refute an idea or an opponent. So, we see this taking place in politics, or let's say you're part of an organization that is developing policy changes. Sometimes you have to refute the establishment or the status quo, or maybe another idea. We see persuasion taking place in sales and marketing. So a large portion of, our consumer behavior is based on, marketing persuasion. And then, we can use persuasion to inspire other people. So when using persuasion, we have to really think about our goals as a speaker and the method of persuasion. So, Dr. Martin Luther King states, it is not possible to bring about a truly beneficial result by using unethical methods. So let's take a look at that. Ethical goals. So when we are developing a persuasive speech, we have to think, are the goals moral, ethical, and legal? We can't persuade someone to go against, some sort of standard moral code, or, persuade them to do something highly unethical or even illegal. So we want to keep our goals in check. Now, we have to also look at the method of persuasion as well. So is the method of persuasion ethical? So essentially, are we being honest? Are we trustworthy? Are we doing our homework? Are we doing the research? Are we presenting solid evidence to try persuading the audience? Or are we misleading or lying to the audience? So we have to really think of the ethical goals and the methods. So some of the challenges that we face with persuasive speaking is really addressing this degree of persuasion. So, when we develop a topic for persuasive speeches, keep in mind that there are going to be people who strongly oppose your idea or what you're trying to argue for. And then we will have, those who are strongly in favor. And so, this becomes a challenge of persuasive speaking. So like the informative speech, we're just simply presenting the facts and the information. We aren't telling the audience what to do or feel or think as a result. So in persuasive speaking, we are informing the audience, but at the same time, we're dealing with their attitudes, their beliefs, their values. And so sometimes when we're approaching persuasive speeches, we really are just trying to, let's say, move the strongly opposed individuals to maybe a moderately opposed position. So we want to expect minor change in the audience. And so don't go into a persuasive speech thinking that you can take a strongly opposed audience and move them all the way over to strongly in favor. So keep that in mind. We're just trying to get them closer to our position, and for some people that might be, moving them slightly over to that position. So this brings us to the target audience. This is the portion of the audience the speaker most wants to persuade. So think about the portion of your audience you want to reach the most. So maybe you're speaking on a topic and you really want to address the strongly opposed individuals in your audience and get them to entertain the idea of what you're proposing. Or maybe you're just not really concerned about those, and you're really looking at the neutral category, people who are undecided, and you want them to get to your position as well. So with any speech, keep the audience in mind as you develop. So some of the things that we can integrate into our persuasive speeches to enhance persuasion are the persuasive appeals. This is from Aristotle's rhetorical theory. And this has to do with the ethos, pathos, and logos. And so we know that ethos is your credibility as the speaker. It's your character. It's your competency. It's essentially everything that you're bringing to the table. And so this is extremely important to integrate into a persuasive speaking engagement, because if the audience doesn't perceive us to be, ethical people of good moral standing, credible individuals, if the audience doesn't perceive us to be competent, then anything we do or say the, isn't going to matter, because there's already that doubt of our character. So we want to make sure as speakers that we are highly credible, that we are practicing what we preach. Essentially, we are a good character. We aren't lying. We aren't doing anything to jeopardize our credibility. So keep that in mind when developing persuasive speeches. The next thing is the pathos, and this is the emotional appeals. And this is generating the emotions or feelings about a certain topic. So, we can tap into the emotional side of, our topic to deliver, the emotions, the feelings to help motivate the audience to change. Now, be mindful of this because if we only tap into the emotions but we don't have the ethos and logos, then again, that could be a form of manipulation. So we want to take a balanced approach to these artistic proofs. And then logos. Logos is the logic, the reasoning, the evidence that we use in our speeches to back up our propositions and claims. And so when confronting the persuasive speech, essentially we want to use a balance of all three of these. In certain speaking engagements, some are more important than others, but I think for persuasion, we need a balanced approach. People have to be in tune to the emotional aspect of our topic, but we as speakers have to really communicate our ethos to the audience. And of course, we have to provide a solid argument, the logos, to our topic or to what we're trying to persuade the audience. So while we are developing our persuasive speeches, keep in mind that we will encounter a variety of audience members. The first one are going to be hostile audience members. These are just individuals who strongly disagree on a fundamental level of what we're trying to persuade, or they're not in favor of the change or course of action that we are trying to argue for. So keep in mind that we will have audience members who just simply do not agree with us whatsoever. And then there's going to be the critical audience member. These individuals tend to be very judgmental and skeptical. And so they are going to be picking apart our arguments, our speeches, in terms of uh, the strengths and weaknesses. And they're going to expose those weaknesses. And so part of our responsibility as the speaker is to really do our homework prior to um, explore the weaknesses of our arguments and try to develop some sort of rebuttal, or address those weaknesses in some meaningful way in our speeches. Then we will encounter the sympathetic audience members. These are individuals who strongly agrees with us, or they're in favor of the change or course of action we're trying to persuade. But I would argue that a large portion of our audience members are going to be uninformed. And these are individuals who knows little about the topic or really doesn't care. And so it's our responsibility to invite them into the conversation, to inform them and persuade them in trying to get a particular course of action. So when you can determine your audience and the position they have towards your topic and towards you, then you can tailor your speech a little bit to increase some of those artistic proofs. So if you're confronted with a hostile audience, it's best to use ethos, that character, the competence, the credibility of facts. It's hard to argue, with science. And so one way we could do this is stress areas of agreement. I think, with our political divide that we are experiencing, in our own government, in our own country and communities, I think is um, the byproduct of this really dangerous way of, uh, you know, I guess rhetoric or just persuasion, and that is where people are overlooking the areas of agreement and they're only focusing on the differences. And so I'm not going to get into too much detail, but um, there's a rhetorical theory called invitational rhetoric, developed by Foss and Griffins. And essentially, this invitational rhetoric suggests that the best way to persuade people is this give and take, and this give and take is really rooted on, inviting other people to share about their points of view before we try defending or arguing against it. So it's this balanced approach. It's more of a dialogue than you're wrong, I'm right. So keep in mind that, with a hostile audience, anything you do or say, could essentially entrench these audience members in their own position. Essentially they take a stronger approach to opposing you. And so you want to avoid that when confronting these audience members. So the best way you could do that is really point out the credibility and stress areas of agreement, and then start building from there. With the critical audience members, again, these are going to be judgmental, very skeptical. They're going to be critical of your message. So it's best to really present strong arguments through logos, because that's what's really they're concerned about, and that's probably what's going to persuade them is a solid argument. The sympathetic audience members, these are people that already agree with your position. So you might use pathos, more of that emotional appeal, to reinforce that positive attitude they have towards you and your topic. And then, of course, the uninformed, you want to use all three of those. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look into the different types of persuasive speeches. Before we get into the three types of persuasive speeches, I wanted to introduce you to the Toulmin model or method of organizing a logical argument. Now, there are more steps to the Toulmin's method, but I think these are the three most critical steps that we can integrate into how we structure our speeches. And in fact, you could probably also integrate this into your own writing. So essentially, there's three steps to this, and the steps are fairly easy. Essentially, the first step is a claim. This is a stated proposition or argument. This is where you just make a statement like, I don't know, vanilla ice cream is better than chocolate ice cream. Okay, you're making a statement. Or, students are paying way too much money for textbooks. Okay, you're making a claim, right? A claim could be anything. Now, in order to back up that claim, we have to integrate some sort of data or evidence. So if I'm making the argument that students are paying too much money for textbooks, then I am going to support material that provides grounds for that belief. So I might take a survey, or I might access, the student expenses, every semester, how much a student on average pays for textbooks, right? So I'm providing this data to the audience so they can believe it for themselves. They aren't just taking my word for it. And then the warrants or justification. This is essentially the connection or the link between the claim and the evidence. So sometimes the evidence doesn't explicitly point to, the claim, and so we have to make that connection between the two. And so it helps the audience also draws that connection and arrive to the same conclusion as well. So here is a brief example. Let's say the claim is college students do not get enough sleep. So, okay, so I'm making that claim. Now, probably from your own personal experiences, you could agree with this, but there are some people that probably wouldn't. And so I'm going to provide some evidence or some data or, grounds for that belief. And so, I'll reference Hirschner's research in 2014 that surveyed, college campuses and found that 70% of students on college campuses didn't get sufficient amount of sleep. So they were below the 8 hours recommendations. And so 70% of people on college campuses are sleep deprived. And so, okay, so I'm making the claim college students do not get enough sleep. Here's the data. And then here's the justification or the link between the two. So because college students aren't getting enough sleep, and because we have empirical evidence to suggest that, I'm arguing that in our curriculum we have nap time, or maybe I'm going to try persuading you to take a nap, not during this presentation, after this presentation, right? So there's a brief example. Okay, so that's the Toulmin's method of developing logical arguments. Now, we can integrate that into these different types of persuasive speeches. So we have speeches that address questions of fact. These types of speeches deal with truth or falsity of an assertion. So again, I made that assertion that college students don't get enough sleep. That is, could be truth or a false statement. And so I'm really, trying to persuade the validity of that statement. Questions of value deals with wrong, rightness, or idea or action. And so now we're starting to move into the subjective realm where it's like, okay, now we're dealing with, things that are worthy, or, the rightness of something, of an idea or action. Now, we also have questions of policy. These are persuasive speeches that deals with specific courses of action, essentially deciding whether something should or should not be done. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these. So the question of fact, again, these types of speeches are trying to persuade the audience on the validity of a fact, or the truth of a fact claim. And so, maybe I might try persuading the audience that an earthquake of 9.0 or above on the Richter scale will hit California in the next 10 years. So I'm trying to persuade you that, there's a big earthquake coming in the next 10 years. Okay. And I'm trying to persuade that that is a factual, valid claim to make. Well, that's something in the future. We can't necessarily argue, one way or the other. But what I could do is provide the audience with a bunch of evidence to support that conclusion. So the central idea, there are 3 good reasons to believe that an earthquake of 9.0 or above on the Richter scale will hit California in the next 10 years. Okay, so you can already, see the progression of the speech. The speaker is going to be integrating 3 good reasons why this is a truth claim. So, okay, here are the 3 main reasons. California has been long overdue of a major earthquake. Many geological signs indicate that a major earthquake may happen soon. Okay, and then experts agree on that an earthquake of 9.0 or above could strike California any day. So there are the 3 things. And obviously, each of these main points, they would go into specifics. So what, okay, California is long overdue for a major earthquake. You might talk on when was the last time we had a major earthquake? What is the time gap between major earthquakes? You could talk a little bit about the science of tectonic plates and how they're shifting, or the San Andreas Fault that runs through San Bernardino. Um, and then in the second main point, you would talk more specifically about what specific geological signs are indicating a major earthquake. So it might be frequency of tremors. The more pressure that builds up in the tectonic plates, that creates more uh, tremors or smaller earthquakes. And so the more smaller earthquakes we experience in repetition, that could indicate that, the pressure is building to the point that it's going to hit that critical mass where it's going to trigger. And then you could also talk about what the experts are saying. So this is a topic that I find interesting. In my senior year of undergrad, I had to take a capstone class related to science. And so I took an earthquake science class at Cal State San Bernardino. And if you didn't know, Cal State San Bernardino sits very close to the San Andreas Fault. And so part of that class, we took a field trip where we hiked behind the campus up to the San Andreas Fault. And it was really interesting. So the fault line, a lot of people think like earthquakes, like when tectonic plates reach, it buckles and it creates this earthquake, right? Well, the San Andreas tectonic plates are horizontal. So they, like, if the big one happens, it's essentially going to split like this, where you're going to have, so our instructor, if I remember correctly, like if we were standing shoulder to shoulder and the fault line was between us, and if the earthquake happened, right, I would be 30 feet in front of the other person, because that's how much, that I don't know what it's called, but the gap, or the movement of the earthquake, of the fault line. Anyways, this is not the point of this presentation, but questions of fact. Now, when we move to questions of value, now we're starting to deal with things that are with worth, righteousness of an idea or action. So essentially, questions of value requires judgment based on a person's belief about what is right, wrong, good or bad, moral or immoral, and etc., ethical, unethical, and so forth. So when dealing with question of value, a speaker needs to justify her or his value judgment in light of clearly defined set of standards. So, we can't just, go around making value claims without defining, the standards that we're operating from. So think about this, like, biblical study scholars, if we look at the Ten Commandments or any major religion, like there are some very strong values associated with killing and murdering, and these are things that are, I think, most people would argue immoral and unethical, extremely bad. So then, what justifies a situation where you take someone else's life? So is it self-defense? Or is there ever such a thing as called a just war? So these, now we're starting to get into that abstract area of now, okay, if you're going to make those arguments, you have to clearly define the standards you're operating from. So here is an example. To persuade my audience that elephant trophy hunting is legally and morally wrong. And so we are going to persuade our audience that hunting elephants for the trophies, is legally and morally wrong. Okay, so the central idea is elephant trophy hunting violates international accords and our duty to treat animals humanely. So we're seeing that this practice is violating the international agreements, and it's violating, humanity's, ethical treatment of animals. So we could structure our main points essentially looking at this. Elephant trophy hunting violates international accords on species conservation. Okay, so you might talk about that, like, different international agreements. And then elephant trophy hunting violates what moral philosopher Immanuel Kant says in our duty to treat animals humanely. And so then we're getting into the philosophical argument, and our responsibility as humans to treat for nurture and take care of the nature around us. Okay, the third type of persuasive speech is the question of policy, whether a course of action should or should not be taken. And so there are two approaches to this. We could really be looking for passive agreement or immediate action. So passive agreement, this is where we're trying to convince the audience that our policy is desirable. We aren't essentially encouraging a specific action to be taken in order to implement that policy. We're just trying to get the audience to, consider the policy or what we're trying to argue for as desirable. So I might try arguing that the death penalty is inhumane and it should be abolished, right? So I'm trying to argue for that. So what I'm trying to persuade you, the audience, is to accept my position on that policy. I'm not trying to argue for a specific course of action. That would be if I'm taking an immediate action approach. This is where I try convincing the audience to act in support of a particular policy. So, I might persuade you that, the death penalty should be revoked, and then I might start collecting signatures, or I might ask you to, vote a certain way. So how do we structure our persuasive speeches? I know we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the semester, but I think, structuring our speeches can really enhance, the logical progression of our persuasive speeches. So the first one is the problem solution, right? Pretty straightforward. So in the main point, you're going to document the existence of a problem. So you're going to sometimes have to persuade us that a problem exists. And then the second main point is where you present the solution to the problem. Now we have this second type of organizational pattern. This is the problem, cause, solution. So this is where we document the problem, we persuade the audience that a problem exists, but sometimes the causes or the factors that contribute to the problem are unclear. And so we have to analyze the causes of a particular problem, and sometimes we have to persuade the audience that a particular cause to the problem is, the primary cause. And then the third main point is when we present that solution. So that is the problem, cause, solution. We could also use a comparative advantage approach. Now, the comparative advantage approach is really, if you think about it, is based on this economic principle, and that is the ability to produce something more efficiently than the counterparts. And so think about this, like, okay, if you're trying to persuade us on how to deal with or resolve like homeless, in our communities, you have to think about, well, what other programs or different approaches are there already in place? And why is your solution any better? And so this is where you are arguing against certain things, so like, I think the biggest argument right now is between, like, what comes first, rehabilitation into society and then, sustainable housing, or, do these individuals need that housing first, like a secure environment, and then maybe go through some rehabilitation program to reintegrate into society. So it's like, what comes first? So some people would say, okay, we need to, get these individuals in housing before we can treat maybe any mental health issues or, chemical dependencies. And then the, other group is like, no, you have to treat those first before, so this comparative advantages is where you're arguing for a specific course of action and you're comparing it against other courses of actions that are addressing that same problem. So essentially, the audience believes the problems exist. You're trying to persuade the audience that your proposed solution is superior than other solutions, and then you're comparing your solutions to other solutions, and you urge the audience to implement your solution. The last type of persuasive speech organizational pattern we can take is the Monroe's motivated sequence. This is essentially a 5-step process. And these 5 steps include the attention, the need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. So the attention, this is where you gain attention of the audience. The need, this is where you show need for change. And so you might highlight the reasons why we need to change. And then the satisfaction, this is where you provide that solution to satisfy that need for change. And then visualization, this is where you enhance the solution by visualizing or communicating to the audience the benefits of implementing the solution. And then the action, this is where you urge the audience to engage in some sort of specific action for the solution. So this can be highly effective if done correctly. So if you are thinking about using the Monroe's motivated sequence, really dive deep into the attention, the need, the satisfaction, visualization, and the action. Okay, so this presentation, we talked a little bit about persuasive speaking. We defined persuasion, talked a little bit about the challenges of persuasion, types of appeal, types of audience, and I introduced you to the Toulmin's method or model of persuasion, different types of claims. So we could have speeches about questions of fact, value, and policy. And then lastly, we talked a little bit about the organizational patterns we can take for our persuasive speeches. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.